So I want to welcome you, Dr. Abbie Shipp, who's a professor and department chair of management and leadership at Texas Christian University at the Neeley School of Business. You've consulted with some amazing firms, so we're excited to have you here today to really talk to us about change management. I know you've worked with great companies like AT&T and Marriott and EY, and so we're excited to have you here today to talk to us about what's going on out there. There's been a lot of change and a lot of things happening. So change management is really something that is imperative for successful leaders. In fact, here at Vari, one of our core values is embrace change. So as you're talking with leaders and you're helping them think about organizations, what are the key things that you're thinking about when they're going into thinking about embracing change?
So I think every company right now is seeing, if we don't change, we die, right? If we're the same company that we were for years and years, our markets go away, our clients go away. There's always that next new shiny thing. And so I think we have to consider, how is the organization embracing that element of change, just like Vari, embrace change. How are we making that a reality? Because if we don't, we're basically putting ourselves out of existence. So change is a really important topic for organizations at all levels, but particularly when you think about senior leadership, it's something we talk about a lot. And in fact, we have a couple of different programs in which I teach that are completely geared around change. It's the only constant, right? And one of the things that we think about a lot is some of the things that make us experts make us resistant to change. So the higher up you get in our organization, or the longer you're in a position, you've created the organization you want, which is sometimes not the organization that needs to meet the new market or some new competitor's response. So change is something that we're always faced with, and yet the older we get, the more experienced we get, the harder it is for us to deal with. 50 to 70% of planned changes fail. Meaning, I can plan to do something with my organization, flip a coin, and I have better odds with the coin than I do of my success. That's not very exciting. So then the question you have to ask yourself is why?
When you talk about flipping the coin and being only right less than half the time, I think as leaders that actually shocks me, but it makes perfect sense.
Well, it's plan to change, right? And that's different than let's decide something on the fly. So plan changes, we want to go into a new market. We want to go from a B2C company to a B2B company, for example. I know you guys have done that. So we make that plan, we work to plan, we roll it out, we have a vision, we get people's input, we execute over time. 50 to 70% of those changes fail. That doesn't mean every change fails, right? It's just when we look at the big changes over time, many of them are not successful. And there's many reasons for that, but key among them is resistance to change, which is what we look at probably the most.
So as you think about leaders and you're talking and coaching leaders and giving them advice based on your research, what are some of the things that you think about or guide them on as they're thinking about, they don't want to change maybe because they've built the structure that you're talking about, or they're nervous about change. So what are some of the tools or ideas that you give for leaders?
One of the hardest ones is to become comfortable with ambiguity. We want a model of change, right? Do these 4 steps, get this result. Create the vision, tell people about the vision, get the buy-in for the vision, get the feedback on the vision, success. It's not that easy. If you think about every organization is created with a people, right? People are different. Sometimes you come to work, you're in a great mood. Sometimes you come to work, you're in a terrible mood. So to think that 4-step model is going to work in every situation for every person, you're not really taking in the complexity and the ambiguity that's inherent in a work environment. So one of the things I talk a lot about is a phrase of moving from change management to change leadership. So change management talks about what do we want to do? What's the structure? What's the strategy? How are the processes that we're going to roll out this new product or this new market? And instead, we have to move over to what's called change leadership, which is, what are people capable of here? What are they interested in? What are they passionate about? What would they completely hate if we didn't get their buy-in to begin with? So instead of focusing on what to do, you focus on who's doing it, how are they doing it? There's an old study from the 1980s that showed that you're better off choosing a strategy that fits your culture than hoping that your culture can change to your new strategy. And that's because people are such an important part of the change process.
So as you think about cultures and organizations, are there tools that you talk to CEOs and leaders about getting the culture that embraces change, that's able to ebb and flow with their business?
Yes, chief among them is engaging with your people. So management by walking around is an old technique. It still works. Asking people, how are things? You know, what's helping you? Is there anything standing in the way of you working to your best potential? In terms of change itself, what are you seeing? I love talking to people on the front lines, right? They're seeing what our clients or what our competitors are doing before it oftentimes gets up to the C-suite, right? So asking those questions and really engaging with folks matters. Let me give you an example. There was a study last year, and it showed that companies that engaged more with their people and focused on employee mindsets were 4 times as successful with change management as those that just focused on the strategy, the tactics, the products. So it's a very tangible outcome to engage with people, and chief among them is that culture. Now I will say, culture doesn't come overnight, right? It's long term. And yet if we're having to continually change, it means we have to continually work on culture. So I think what's really important is that leaders look at what am I doing to facilitate change? What behaviors am I exhibiting that model that creativity, that encourage people to take risks, that when they fail, I said that's okay because we tried something new. All of those things, the way in which you personally embrace change and success and failure, it trickles down.
That makes perfect sense. I love the management by walking around. I think I studied that way back in grad school back in the day, and I almost thought that was a dying art, but recognizing that that's such an important thing. So if you've got a company with hundreds of employees, the CEO may or may not know everybody. But when you get to these larger organizations, because you work with both medium-sized and these larger organizations, how do they get the data that encourages that?
Obviously, it becomes more complex, but I think if it's in your culture, everybody does it, right? So if you do that, your senior team does that, your mid-level managers do that, your frontline managers do it. If it's a part of the culture to connect with our people, if it's a part of our culture, for example, when we have challenges or crises, the first thing we do is go check on our people. Then it's inherent in everything that we do. We live and breathe this type of an employee-first culture. So no, you can't know every single person. And I know you do some videos too, right? Here's what we're doing this week. When you can't see everybody face to face, of course there are ways in which you can do that, but you've also got to embed it into your culture to where everyone wants to participate.
We describe our culture as really built on top of our core values. And as people are added to it and we hire them based upon our core values, they add to the DNA and the fabric that make up our culture. And so really getting people that embrace change, that want to create fans for life, our core values, they start to add to it, and we start to really hire more and more people that embody those values.
Yeah, interesting you say that. Some of the very first pieces of research I worked on were about fit. And there's a framework called attraction, selection, attrition, and it says if we attract the right people, and we select those right people, that'll reinforce the culture. If for any reason somebody wasn't a fit, over time they would have some attrition, but we'd keep getting more and more of the people with the right values. The newer version of that, in terms of change, some of the research I just had in the last year showed that one of the most important things for us to do is to make sure that when people are here, that they are changing at the same rate and direction that the company is changing. So let me give you an example. We did a study of a group of long-term tenured individuals, people who had 10, 15, 20 years at one company, almost unheard of anymore. And one of the things that we found is that they're accumulating experiences. They're watching, how did my leadership handle this situation? How did my manager take care of that problem? How did the company value X, Y, or Z? And as they do that, they're crafting stories about where have I been, where am I going, where is the company, where's the company going? That whole narrative then shapes, do they want to stay? Do they want to be on board? So I think you have to think about culture as a living, breathing organism and every individual within as a living, breathing organism. And if we want the company to embrace change, then we have to have each of those individuals feeling like their narrative matches the company's narrative. That's challenging. I'm the first to admit that's challenging, right? Because you go to talk to any one individual and it might be different. But it's the connecting, the talking to, the getting the stories, telling our company's story, getting your story into the company's story. I think that's when we really find a sweet spot.
We talk to so many CEOs that are bringing on, they want the next generation of talent to join the organization, but they don't want to alienate the current generation. And how do they transfer that knowledge, and how do they create a space that embodies communication and collaboration, but also recognize that the next generation of talent may approach things a little bit differently, and so connecting all those dots. And I love how you're threading that with stories.
Yeah, one also interesting thing, a newer development that we're seeing in terms of research is the power of networks. And I think this is a really interesting way to think about everybody's role in not just the company culture, but the company network. And so what people are adding in terms of who's most central, who has the most information, who has the most experience. So those more experienced people that you're talking about, they feel a part of, because that value of being central in the network is there. And at the same time, we can use other individuals to help bridge to other networks. And that's how we can also create change very effectively. So one of the things I do, for example, we have an executive education program, the faculty director, it's called the Adaptive Leader. And one session, we just do network mapping. Tell me about your change, who's involved, how are they related, and you put it on the board and you color code it. And what it does is it highlights some of the most valuable people perhaps that you hadn't been tapping, or maybe some really undervalued people. For example, a hospital system, they'd never gone to talk to the janitors. And yet the janitors in this particular change were a key stakeholder that we're going to make sure that that was successful or not. So it highlights some assumptions that we have about the hierarchy or the status or long-term employees, that we can look at how are those people all connected instead of just looking at position or who has the biggest corner office.